Day 6, Mark chapter 2.
Verses, okay, we're going to read from verse 13 to verse 17. Let me read it out here, and maybe we can pause along the way. It says, once Jesus went out beside the lake, a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him.
I love that.
There you
It's
go.
such a cool picture. But one of the things I find funny about this is it just says, because Mark is just telling a story that happened over a longer period of time really fast. And so Mark's always to the point. So it's like there might have been more that happened, but the way it's written is like Jesus is walking, sees a guy at a tax collector's booth. He's like, follow me. And it just says, and he rose and followed him. Like, it's just like, okay, I guess whatever. So I don't know if it like actually happened like immediately without a thought. And a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is maybe almost for sure at this point in time, Levi, Matthew, had been hearing about Jesus, heard about the miracles he's been doing. So maybe he was hopeful that when he would walk by, can you imagine if he was like, I wonder if he will notice me. I wonder if he'll say something. I even wonder if he wanted to follow Jesus, but didn't have the courage to ask.
Yeah, just needed the invitation. He was just like, oh man, he's sitting there at the tax collector booth, just imagining, I've heard everything about this guy. He maybe saw him off in the distance and was thinking, oh man, how amazing would it be if he asked someone like me to follow him?
And when you say someone like me, I think that's really important to sort of point out that, so for us, like a tax collector, like the tax man, the CRA, some people don't like paying taxes, but it's not like people who work for the Canadian Revenue Agency or wherever country you're from, whatever the tax man's name is. They're not evil people. But in this time, it was actually a really scandalous thing to do. Like, so in a place like Capernaum, for someone like Levi to be a tax collector meant that he was kind of a traitor of his own people, working for the Roman government to bring taxation and control, and even to rip off your own people to profit for yourself. And so in terms of like good guys and bad guys, sometimes we put the world into those categories, which I don't think is necessarily helpful. But definitely in this story, there's people that we're going to meet later called Pharisees, that's how they categorize the world. Like those who are good, there's like good people and bad people. He's one of the bad people. And then later on, it's going to use language like he brought all of his friends over and they're all just other sinners and tax collectors and people like that. So this is why it's so interesting that Jesus says to him, come follow me.
And that's what happens next. He says, next thing that's happening is a dinner with Jesus at Levi's house. And you mentioned Matthew, because what we find out is Levi also goes by the name Matthew, and he's the one who wrote Matthew's gospel. So verse 15, let me read it. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And that's where the scene ends.
So if I could kind of like stitch together the thread that we've been following so far, Mark starts off by saying, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And then Mark talks about John the Baptist preparing the way for the Lord, for Yahweh to come, for God to come and to deliver his people. And then it begins to unfold this idea of the kingdom. We talked about how Jesus came doing something. He came establishing his kingdom, the goodness, the freedom, the healing of God, bringing it to earth. And so if we could use like the language of kingdom, in a kingdom, there's a king, and Jesus is the king. This is the Lord God. And then in his kingdom, the question is, who's invited into the kingdom? Who gets to participate in this new reality that Jesus is bringing, this one of freedom and hope and healing? And for the religious leaders at the time, the Pharisees, they would think that when God would come and bring his kingdom, the people that would be invited in would be the people who were like the most religious and followed the most strict kind of rules. And then what we see happening in this story, so what Mark is showing us is that Jesus really surprised the religious leaders of his day by not inviting the typical people, the church folk, but even the people on the biggest edges of society, the people on the margins. And it's actually like, it really is quite scandalous what Jesus is doing, because he's eating with these people too. And this is a symbol of intimacy. This is like eating in this time would have been like for people that you love and care about and bring close. And so what we see is that Jesus, God, is bringing the people who wouldn't be expected to be included as close as possible into his world.
And one of the comparisons as you were making it there that comes to mind is the Pharisees and the religious leaders, even of today, we kind of have this mentality sometimes, a religious mentality that says, oh, if I do all the right things, then I can have a relationship with God. And what Jesus is coming, he's kind of flipping the script, so to speak, on this scene, because he's saying, oh, when you're in a relationship with God, when you know how loved you are, then your lifestyle is going to change. Then you're going to do what's right. And so the expectation is that Levi, his whole life's changing at this moment, right? And the part of why the religious leaders are upset is because Jesus is hosting this meal, and it's a sign of friendship. Like, who are you sitting with at the meal? Who are you honoring as an equal almost, or as a respected friend by eating with them? And they're just like, how is he doing this with tax collectors and sinners? It just boggles their mind.
I remember driving up to university. I used to commute with some friends, and one of the guys I'd commute with, I remember him saying one time, like, oh, church isn't for people like me. And we were just talking about faith and walking with Jesus. And he says, oh, church isn't for people like, and what he meant was like, Jay, you know, the kind of things I do on the weekends, you know, how I, how I do relationships and all that stuff. And he goes, church isn't for people like me. And I found that such a, I remember saying, like, where did you get that idea? You know, like thinking, if you read the Gospels, like the message of Jesus, you would never come to the conclusion that Jesus, if anything, you'd come to the conclusion that Jesus is actually just for people like that. Like, that's who Jesus is most drawn to. But, 2,000 years later, I get where my friend was coming from, because the church can sometimes be known as uptight and judgmental. But what we see here is a different version of the invitation of Christianity to people on the margins. I think there's two questions we should consider as we kind of reflect on today. I think the first question is, have you ever considered yourself disqualified? Have you ever seen yourself as somebody who Jesus wouldn't invite to the table? You've decided, the mistakes I've made, the things I've done, the things that have been done to me, somehow make me uninvitable to Jesus' kingdom, to his table, to friendship. And this story really invites us to think differently about that as we reflect on ourselves. I guess the second question is, have we looked out into the world around us with the categories that Jesus came to break down, the who's in and who's out, the categories of like, who's the type of person that should be invited, who's the type of person that shouldn't. And so I think this just convicts me in both those ways, because sometimes I disqualify myself, and sometimes I look around and I disqualify people. I know I shouldn't, but I do it. I find my mind can go that way. And this story corrects me and challenges me in that way.
I think those are questions are bang on. And I think probably from Jason and I's perspective, for any of our friends who are watching this and you're not already in a relationship with God, you wouldn't consider yourself a Christian. I mean, the big question we're saying is like, hey, would you consider this idea that God literally is so overcome with love for someone like you? And that's so our stance is not, oh yeah, we know God loves us because we live good lives. No, it's like, wow, we're so loved, we're so accepted and forgiven by Jesus. He's welcomed us at the table, and now that changes the rest of our lives. And so just to say, our heart, that's our heart. So if you've watched all this and you're not a Christian, we're just so thankful. And for those of you who are Christians, we hope this is sinking deeper into your hearts, the love of God.
As you were saying that, I just pictured the opening scene, of the story. Jesus is walking down the street and he just looks at Levi, the tax that says, come follow me. And I wonder, everyone would have been so surprised, right? I just want to, maybe for everyone listening, like Jesus is walking down the street. I know this sounds a bit cheesy, but I think there's something special here. He's walking down the street and there's a lot of people around, and you may be thinking, there's no way he's inviting me. That's how Levi would have felt. But he's like looking right at you and he's saying, hey, you, come follow me. Me? Yeah, you, come follow me. And our response isn't, let's sort out our world. Our response is, say yes, partner with him, and he's going to begin to take beauty out of all the different elements of your life, the good, the bad, the broken, the ugly, all of it.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, man. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.